And good afternoon, everybody. I'm here with Senator Portman and Catherine. Catherine, how are you doing today, sir?
I am well. How are you today, Matthew?
I'm doing well, and I'll just let you do the honors and introduce the senator if you want to, please.
I would like to because, I have the honor of Senator Rob Portman not only being a colleague, but being a personal friend as well. So just a little bit on his legislative background. Senator Portman has introduced and passed into law 172 of his legislative priorities. It includes 126 bills and 46 amendments. He's also introduced more than 400 bills, 300 of which were bipartisan. So I'm happy to work with the senator on many social service forefronts, especially the opiate epidemic, as you know, is dear to my heart. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Rob Portman.
Great, Catherine, thank you so much, Commish, for allowing me to come on the podcast, and Matthew, thank you as well. Look, it's just great to be on with you guys, and I look forward to talking about this issue. One thing just to say at the outset is that you're doing this podcast is timely. Unfortunately, after a few years of real success of reducing the rates of addiction, particularly the overdose number, which is one that is measured, and also overdose deaths, we were actually seeing a decrease finally after really several decades of increases every single year. And then the pandemic hit, and for a lot of reasons, some say it's isolation, job loss, there are, I think, other reasons as well. But during this pandemic, coronavirus wasn't our only problem. We also had this increase in mental health issues, and specifically in use of opioids and overdoses and overdose deaths. So we just got the numbers for September 2019 through September 2020. And unfortunately, it shows that we have a record number of Americans who died from drug overdoses, 87,000 people, which is just heartbreaking to me because, again, we have been making progress on that. So you had a 29% increase in drug overdoses. In Ohio, it was about 24%, and we just can't let that continue to happen. So that's why your podcast is so timely for me, is just to hear directly from you about what's going on, in Northeast Ohio, particularly in Ashtabula County with you, Commissioner, and then to talk about, where we go from here. So anyway, really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and sir, I really appreciate you coming on. So a little bit about me. I do have a background in mental health counseling as well. And it's just staggering the numbers that you just threw out to me. My wife is also in the medical field, and we've talked about it a number of times on the show, just about the increase in pediatrics and the younger generation, and not just the older, but in the younger generation of the drug use, the abuse, all across the board, just everything that's happened within the last, year. What are some of the things that, you are working on that can make a difference in this area?
Well, thanks, Matthew. Going back 4 or 5 years, Congress started to take a much more active role, particularly on the opioid issue. And we spent a few years putting together a package that passed probably 4 years ago. It's called the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. And I was the author, along with a Democrat, totally bipartisan. In fact, I would say it was nonpartisan. And I think that has helped. It's provided billions of dollars of new money, so real money for the demand side, meaning prevention efforts, treatment. And both you and Catherine are very familiar with that in terms of, what treatments work better than others, including medication-assisted treatment. And then also for longer-term recovery. Congress had never funded any recovery efforts. And as you all know well, the longer you can have a recovery program, the higher likelihood there is that there will be a successful outcome. And you'll have, someone who can get through it without having the relapses that are too often the case. So this is something that was working. As I said, we actually could see some progress. So now we find ourselves where we can get back to providing some of that in-person treatment, helping people to be able to get back with their recovery coaches. I see, Matthew, that you've been a life coach yourself, and you understand the importance of that face-to-face contact. So that will be helpful. But also, we have new funding in there for additional efforts to try to reach people, including more money for telehealth. One thing we learned during the last year is that with regard to mental health, behavioral health, but also with regard to opioid treatment, telehealth can be quite effective. Unfortunately, it's not reimbursed by the federal government like in person, and sometimes telehealth is kind of all you have, particularly in a more rural area like parts of Ashtabula County. So that's in there. We also have a reauthorization of another program called the 21st Century Cures Act, and that's funds that goes to the states to be able to deal with, again, the demand side. So our new bill is called Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act 3.0, and again, it's sort of recognizing where we are, authorizing additional funding. It also does more in a few areas that I think are important. One is on the criminal justice and recovery side. A lot of people getting out of the prison or jail system, come out as an addict, and they're not given the help when they're behind bars to be able to deal with that addiction. That will really help. We also permanently changed the law to allow providers to provide medication-assisted treatment and other necessary drugs without a prior in-person visit. That's been one of the issues. And then we have legislation to deal with fentanyl. Fentanyl is the one that's still killing more people in Ohio than anything. And fentanyl is the most powerful drug out there. It's an opioid, but it's a synthetic opioid, and it's deadly. And if you look at the people who are overdosing and losing their lives today, a lot of it's because of fentanyl, either directly, 100% fentanyl, or often it's mixed with other drugs, including, unfortunately, drugs like cocaine and crystal meth. And so we have legislation to try to say, let's not allow these evil scientists to slightly change the composition of the drug and then not have it be a scheduled drug. In other words, not allow the Drug Enforcement Agency and other law enforcement to be able to consider it illegal because they've changed the molecular compound a little bit. And that, unfortunately, is something that has never been made permanent, the ability to do that. And the scheduling of these, what we call the fentanyl analogs, is going to end on May 6th. So in only about 20 days, we've got to deal with this. And that legislation is currently pending. So that's some of the stuff that we are doing right now to try to, be sure that we are helping people at a time when, coming out of the COVID-19 experience, there are a lot of people addicted, a lot of people who need to get into treatment, and hopefully the in-person treatment will help a lot of them. And then for others, telehealth can be very useful. And then to be sure that this fentanyl doesn't get out of hand, because if you were able to sell fentanyl without having it be illegal, you'd have even lower prices, because one reason you get the price up a little bit for these drugs is you do have, aggressive law enforcement that helps to reduce the supply of it. So it is related to the demand side as well. Anyway, those are a few things that's going on, Matthew.
Thank you. Kath?
Senator, I just have to thank you for the work that you and the other legislators do. We see a tremendous impact with those dollars that are coming down here, specifically just to Ashtabula County. And, being able to have that funding resource available to be working with our families here to get them healthy again is so critical. And so we want to thank you here from Ashtabula County just on the work that you and our fellow legislators are working on. So we thank you for that.
Well, of course, and thank you for what you're doing. As you know, Catherine, many years ago, about 20 years ago, I started an anti-drug coalition in my own hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio, still going. And you have done that in Ashtabula, and this initiative you have called Rural America is really important, but also, being involved in, and I think you were instrumental in the creation of it, the Crime Enforcement Agency of Ashtabula County, which is really a drug task force. Thank you for what you're doing. I think at the local level is where we're going to see, the most success and the opportunity to change hearts and change minds.
Thank you, and we are super proud of the Crime Enforcement Agency. We call them CEAS. Their acronym, is how we go by, and they are doing phenomenal work. We have an incredible countywide law enforcement group that is made up of officers from all over the county, not just from our sheriff's department, but we've also partnered with the FBI, the ATF, and the DEA. So making it a true collaboration has been, I think, critical in the success of our task force. We are coming up on the task force being 3 years old. I can't believe it has been that long since their creation, but we are excited, and they really are doing great work. They're saving lives, they're taking criminals off the street, getting those dealers off the street. So we're so proud of them.
Well, again, a lot of this, doesn't happen without local leadership. And I know you've also got a background, not just as a commissioner, but also somebody who has worked in child services. And I know you were the community service coordinator for Ashtabula County Child Services Board. So it really helps to have that background. And you get it. So thank you for what you do. And look, I think this is going to be one of the unfortunate downsides coming out of this COVID-19 is we got to get back at it and really, in a very local way and direct way, get into people's families and talk to social service folks and treatment providers and law enforcement together to work on this. I know that's being done in Ashtabula County already, but every county in Ohio has got to do it at the local level and really got to change this dynamic and get back to where we were really only a year and a couple months ago, where we were actually making progress and beginning to get people back to work and back to their families and, back to a life that they could be proud of and that I think God intended them to have. In other words, achieving their God-given potential rather than living the life of an active addict. So we got our work cut out for us, don't we?
Absolutely. And, I know just to change gears a little bit and talk about some of the other very important topics that you work on. Obviously, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. So here we have been, celebrating the prevention efforts and, those who have stepped up to be the voice for a child to report that. Because as everyone knows, child abuse is preventable. So if you could talk a little bit about that, but also about human trafficking. All of these topics seem to, when the pandemic hit, our mental health, our drug epidemic, our child abuse and neglect and human trafficking all kind of seem to be shelved. Nobody was talking about it because the pandemic had really taken over, and those things were not going away. And so part of the reason for the podcast was bring back to light the things that we need to still be talking about, reducing stigma, making sure that our children are protected, giving hope to those who feel hopeless at this point, that we are here for you. So if you could just touch base on child abuse prevention and human trafficking.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for what you're doing at the local level, because I can talk about what we're doing at the national level, but really it's got to happen in people's homes, in their communities, in their churches, in their schools. And so it's important that we have these federal laws, but it's even more important to me that it be something that's done at the local level. We have passed a number of laws that makes it harder for people to engage in trafficking, particularly online. You remember back only a couple years ago, there was this group called Backpage that was online, selling girls and women online freely. I mean, just particularly underage girls. And it wasn't even on the dark web. It was just, something that they were able to get away with. And they were able to get away with it because there's a law that Congress passed many years ago, back in the 90s, I think 1996, called Section 230. That's gotten a little play recently because it's gotten to be kind of political. But Section 230 basically says if you are a platform, like this group called Backpage, that you are not responsible for what people put on your pages. So they knew that they were selling girls, underage girls online, and they were actually covering it up as best that they could, including, using words that were sort of code words, but not, and editing people's advertisements for selling girls. And so we passed a law that said, hey, you're not protected by Section 230. You can't get immunity, which is what you can under federal law for all these online people. And it was done back in the 90s to try to encourage the internet. It's because you didn't want to discourage the internet, so you wanted to give people liability from what happened on their site. But when you're knowingly selling girls online, that's where you have to draw the line, in my view. So we passed that law, and now we've had a lot of investigations. Backpage has gone out of business. We've got the attorneys general from all around the country supporting this effort. Also, a lot of people in the faith-based community and just a lot of people in the legal system. And so it now allows for state and local law enforcement to go after these websites that violate federal sex trafficking laws. And it allows the victims to get justice by going after these websites as well. So that's important, because what we have found is over the past 10 or 15 years, increasingly, this has shifted from the street corner to the iPhone. In other words, the online presence had increased trafficking dramatically. And look, there's a lot of good things about the internet, also a lot of bad things, and this is one of the bad ones. Selling people online, but also selling drugs and other things. So anyway, that's now in effect, and that's been helpful. But as you can imagine, it kind of gets pushed off the internet, and it ends up somewhere else. So we got to keep it up. We do have some new legislation we've introduced called the Missing Children's Assistance Act, to try to be sure that kids, can be identified. President Trump actually signed part of that into law in 2018, and that's helpful to deal with some of the child abuse issues you're talking about, and be sure that missing children are more likely to be found. It helps to be able to provide a photograph of the child and so on, which was not the law previously. And then we've done some other things to try to specifically address the issue of drugs and human trafficking, because it's so related. So many girls and women end up getting trafficked because of the drug issue. In other words, they become addicted, and then their trafficker provides them the drugs. And so we're trying to help to ensure that those people who are sort of, get caught up in this are able to expunge their records and get the treatment they need and get back on their feet, and helping to deal with some of these trafficking victims. So there's lots more to do. We've got new legislation that we've introduced to increase access to treatment, prevention, and bolster the fight, against trafficking. But I think some of these federal laws have helped and provided some funding, including, I assume, for Ashtabula County. I know for Northeast Ohio, we work closely with the trafficking organizations there, the nonprofits that deal with the trafficking issue. And a lot of it's just awareness. And so the podcast, again, is timely. If you see something you think is wrong, if someone in your neighborhood, or, if you're out to eat and you see something that just looks wrong, like an older guy with a younger girl and being coercive, or girls, say something. That's one way, law enforcement is able to help more, is just have everybody be more vigilant. And there's some wonderful stories about that of, kids who have been saved, literally. One of the things that I have done is work with the Lodging Association in Ohio, so the hotels, and they're now doing training. And there's some stories of, someone coming in with a few girls and not treating them well, and the person at the front desk notices it and, calls law enforcement. Law enforcement goes, asks a couple questions. They find out, yes, indeed, that's what's going on here. This is trafficking, and these girls are missing. And, they were able to get those girls back with their families and stop something horrific that was going on. So we all have a role to play in this, don't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're coming up to the end of the time. Gosh, that was really short. But I totally, really, really appreciate your time. coming on and just spending a couple of minutes with you.
Likewise.
Both topics, all the topics are just so important right now. Very, like you said, they're very timely. We all have to make a difference, all have to work together and make a difference. So Catherine, I'll give you a word, and then Senator will let you close us out.
Great. Thanks, Matthew.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator, for joining us tonight. Unfortunately, our other partner, Dr. Deborah King, is traveling today, so she was unable to join us. She has been very instrumental in working with survivors and those in recovery. So she was sad that she had to miss today, and I just wanted to let you know that. And thank you again for all the work that you're doing. We're going to keep doing Rural America. Will be presented not only virtually this year, but actually in person later in the year. We're still going across the country talking, and I'm telling my story and my journey, and that story keeps evolving as we now have custody of our granddaughters. So the story hasn't ended yet, and we'll just keep bringing that awareness and reducing stigma on that opiate epidemic front. And I'll let you wrap it up for us, Senator.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And again, it's great to hear your voice, Catherine. I look forward to seeing you in Nashville County. And I'd like to meet you, Matthew. And also, it would be an honor to meet Dr. King. She's had a heck of a life, too, being the daughter, as I saw, of Don King, who I've met on occasion back in the day. But you guys are doing a great job of just getting the word out. And you mentioned stigma. I mean, this sort of all starts with recognizing that these are issues that need to be brought forward, and particularly with regard to addiction, that it is a disease, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get at it and to treat it properly. If you don't treat it as a disease and you just say, well, we're going to lock people up and throw away the keys, those people stay addicted. And by the way, you never throw away the keys. People get out. 98% of the people in prison today, I guess, are going to get out. So you want to be sure that they get out and they can be productive citizens, and that includes, again, providing them the help, the tools they need to try to deal with their disease, which is addiction. And then with regard to child abuse and trafficking, same thing. The more information, the better. Don't try to hide it. At my churches over the years and schools where our kids are gone, and certainly in communities where I've lived, sometimes there's kind of a denial. There's sort of a sense of it doesn't happen here, and maybe a sense that somehow that will keep people from being able to give the school a bad grade or not to come to the church or whatever. But it's much better to just get it out there, let people know what's going on so that people can help, and those who are suffering know that they've got others who they can turn to in a time of need, who have had similar experiences, and people who do care about them, like you do, Catherine, and like you do, Matthew. So I agree with you on that, and getting rid of that stigma is part of that. You've got to move beyond it. And when that happens, I think we're going to have much more success. In the meantime, post-COVID, let's all redouble our efforts. We're going to try to pass some of this legislation here, just keep the effort up. And the little nonprofit I started in Cincinnati some 25 years ago, I guess, it's called Prevention First. They're still going strong, and they never gave up. During those 25 years, we had some times when we had a tough time getting enough funding in the door, and we had some other hurdles to go over. And now today, boy, they've got a big job ahead of them, which is to get that prevention message out there to keep people out of the funnel of addiction in the first place, and help people to live a healthier life. As I said earlier, it's a life that I think is meant for all of us. In other words, meeting that promise of our lives and the potential of our lives. It's the God-given potential within every human being, and that's what this is all about. So thank you guys for having me on. Hope you get to Ashtabula County and see you soon. And I really appreciate what you do every day.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Matthew.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And hey, everybody, I hope y'all are doing well. I'm so excited to be here with two of my favorite people and our special guests, Deborah and Catherine. How are y'all doing tonight?
Doing great, Matthew. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How about you, Catherine?
Doing great. We had beautiful weather over the weekend and now it's cold. So
Oh,
we're just, it is sunny here in Ashtabula County in Northeast Ohio. So we're blessed for that.
yeah, no, that's awesome. I hate cold weather. I might have been a Marine. I might be a retired Marine, but me and cold weather, we do not mix. So my wife wonders how I survived, but I did. So what we'll do here is I'll have you two ladies introduce yourselves, and then Catherine will have you introduce our special guest. How about that?
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Deborah, why don't you go first?
All right. Well, I'm Dr. Deborah King. I'm the CEO and founder of It Takes a Life to Save a Life organization. I am an advocate for addiction recovery, suicide prevention, and anything that deals with the perseverance of life. Catherine?
So I am Commissioner Catherine Whittington. I am a county commissioner here in Ashtabula County, Ohio. I am serving in my second term. Prior to becoming a county commissioner, I worked at Children's Services as our community outreach coordinator. My passion is in helping those in drug addiction. My family has been impacted directly, so that is one of the things that I work very hard with our law enforcement. I helped create our local drug task force, so we're excited that they are coming up on their 2-year anniversary. So, and I am excited to introduce our special guest today. And Matthew, I have to share, she has a mutual friend of ours.
Really?
Yes.
Who is that?
Mr. Carlton Hall.
No kidding. I love Carl. Yeah, that's awesome.
I know. So Carlton actually introduced me to Stacee a while back ago, and prior to podcast days. And I thought since April is Child Abuse Prevention Month,
Okay.
I really felt that including Stacee in our podcast today would be a great thing. Stacee, it's Stacee Read, and she works for the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. She has been there, I believe, since 2011. So I'd like to welcome Stacee to our podcast tonight and to just talk about the child welfare system and what they're doing nationally and what she's doing in her hometown, and just get to know her a little better and how we can partner and work together to save these children, because as everybody knows, child abuse is preventable.
Absolutely.
And so, we are all working for that greater cause to save the most vulnerable population that we have, which is our children. So welcome, Stacee.
Well, thank you guys. It's very exciting to be here, and thanks to Carlton for introducing us all, and I'm excited.
Yeah, so Stacee, tell us just a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, and really kind of what got you into doing, what you do today.
Yeah, so currently I'm the director of DEC Network Development for the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. I'm also their child welfare expert. I've been with National DEC since 2011 in some capacity, but prior to that, I was 20 plus years in the child welfare field at various levels, sprinkled with a little bit of mental health as well. And I honestly really got into the child welfare field by accident. They had an opening. I was looking for a change. I was going through my master's degree. I was ready. And I started doing child abuse and neglect investigations and working directly with families and children. And I have to tell you, it stole my heart. And I have been helping child welfare and other professionals as well since then, because it's such important work. I think that we can all do this different. We can all look at addiction and how these children are impacted differently. And we can honestly change the trajectory of these children's lives by addressing the issues that need to be addressed. And I think we all have that opportunity. And so when I came to National DEC, I started working, obviously we're a national organization and we have state chapters and local and tribal chapters as well. And it's really allowed me to kind of branch out to train all sorts of disciplines. So law enforcement, child welfare, medical, fire and EMS, teachers, prevention services, to learn how to identify these children at risk, to learn what the risks are, to learn what the long-term impact is, so we can do things different. Because if we continue to do things the same way, this isn't going to change for the children and families.
Yeah. Yeah. And real quick, Catherine and Deborah, when you're not talking, could y'all mute your mic? Because we're getting a little bit of a background noise, and I think it's just hearing us and all that. But so that'll work. No, that's awesome. That's really interesting because so my wife, she's a nurse and works in the pediatric emergency department. And, just currently right now, and you can't ignore current events, but with COVID and everything that's kind of happening and going on, we're seeing a good amount of, rise in child abuse, rise in child neglect, rise in sexual assault on kids, all of those different things.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to hear your take on, some of the trends that you're currently seeing with things that are going on out there right now.
Well, I think you're spot on. We are obviously across the nation since COVID hit and there's more isolation. We've seen the child welfare hotline, child abuse and neglect calls severely go down. And some states are reporting that they're down by 40%. We know as professionals, their child abuse and neglect is not going down. These are children in the home all day long with parents who maybe have domestic violence issues or addiction issues. We know that those things haven't stopped. We know that the stressors within the home have increased. We're seeing a lot of unemployment, changing of jobs, just the stress in the home. And with those increases of that stress, we know that there's more child abuse and neglect. The problem is that there's nobody that's seeing a lot of these children. They're not in school, or they're in school a couple days a week, or they're only on Zoom. So we're really trying to shift the mindset of our professionals to do this different. So teachers, what can you look for? So we've been training our teachers on, what to look for in the background, what to listen to, or what to listen for. If you can do parent-teacher conferences, really encouraging the parent and child interactions. Doctors' offices, really asking the kids to walk around, show me your house. Service providers, really doing interactions with the child and the parent in the home over Zoom, so we can see the background, so we can see what the response is. We have to be able to help children virtually and identify the children virtually. It was just something that's kind of out of all of our purviews until COVID, but we are getting better. But as soon as these children go back to school full time, we're going to see a huge increase in those calls as well.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part of it too, Matt, is most of our schools are being called back this month or by May 1st, which only leaves a few weeks for us to have eyes on these children, because then we are going to break for summer.
Yeah.
So you'll see the decline again. So, it's just so important to have eyes on these children as churches are opening up and, our communities start opening back up. I think you're going to see that floodgate open, but it's going to be a very short window.
Yeah. Deborah, you got anything?
Prior to COVID, what was the largest amount of calls or problems that you sought as a professional dealing with child abuse or neglect?
I love that question. I think a lot of people think that it is abuse, and I have to tell you, hands down, probably across the nation, the majority of the calls are around neglect, and the majority of the calls are due to substance use in the family. So children are impacted in a variety of different ways when it comes to substance use, whether it's a chaotic environment or lack of supervision, or a lack of necessities like food, clothing, and shelter. They're impacted, and it's pervasive across our communities. And yet we're not talking about it. We're talking about the opioid epidemic and all of that, but we're not talking about those secondary victims, which are those children. And that hasn't changed. When I was doing investigations and, boots on the ground, the majority of the investigations that we did were around substance use, or substance use played a factor in those families' lives and in those children's lives. And we have to start addressing those.
As a mental health therapist, I used to deal with a lot of clients who had the substance abuse and or mental health in addition to. And one of the main things I saw when we would deal with the children, we would try to get them away or somewhere stable while we tried to treat the parent, because the majority of them were hungry. Because when they're high, they're not hungry. So they forget that the other people in the house have to eat. And that was the biggest thing that I saw, was the hunger and the clean clothes. So, that was a dead giveaway for me, that you have a problem that you're not addressing the other people that live in the house. And to me, that's a worse abuse than being struck sometimes, because that sting will go away, but that hunger pain stays there.
Absolutely. That neglect can be really terrible for children. They don't understand. They know that something is off in the family and they can't pinpoint it. So if you think about how children deal with things versus how adults deal with things, you and I as adults can work through a problem and understand, oh, that's not me. I lost my job. I can't provide food. A child looks at it as possibly, well, what did I do wrong? Well, maybe if I wouldn't have thrown that fit, my mama wouldn't have used drugs. Or maybe if I would have behaved, I wouldn't have been taken away. So they personalize a lot of that. And I think it's really hard to repair some of the damage. It oftentimes can be a lot of services, a lot of money, but for a lot of years.
So my oldest granddaughter is going to be 8 next month. And probably since the day, I got them, there was no meal schedules or anything like that. So sitting down to breakfast, lunch, and dinner and having snacks, and that was all very, I would say, challenging for them, because that was not what they were used to. We didn't go through the food hoarding stage, which many of our children who are neglected and hungry go through. But what we found with our oldest is the fascination to learn about self-sustaining. So she's very curious of hunting and fishing and gardening, and that whole piece of, if I can self-sustain off the land, I will never be hungry.
Oh, wow.
So she has taken it to a really different level. So this year, fishing lessons are underway. They were out fishing, and, just introducing those things that most of us take for granted. Thankfully, we live in a rural community, and that's always been part of our lives. So, to teach her those things aren't unusual for us as a family, because that's what we taught our other children. So, but she's very curious as to where things come from, what meat comes from which animals. So it's very interesting that she has taken that experience and then is educating herself on how she can never be hungry again.
Wow, it's almost like she's building resilience and obviously filling a void as well, but it's helping her cope. And those are great coping skills, to be with the land, to be outside, to be self-sufficient. But also I think it shows us how impactful substance abuse can be for children, and how they can be so resilient and be okay.
Yeah. So how do you, we recognize that, we learn and we see this, what are the steps that you take so this doesn't impact them further in their adult life and their parenting life, because obviously some kids are going through this their whole youth and until they're adults. So what are some of the steps that you guys take to try to help with this?
So I always recommend, and we do a lot of training for professionals to help them understand, we have to identify these children at the earliest point, whether that is when mom is pregnant or when the child is 8 or when that person becomes an adult. It's never too late to identify that somebody is either at risk or is in need of help. And if a child makes it through their entire childhood living in a home where there is addiction, and they don't receive services, it's still not too late. So we recommend that those adults, instead of continuing the cycle of substance use or that multi-generational cycle, we want them to get help because it's not too late for them. I don't care if you're 50. If you have trauma from your childhood, especially around substance misuse in the home, you can get help. And there are services that are directly related to that, because what we don't want to see, and what we've seen for years, we don't want to see the multi-generational cycles continue. And if we don't start identifying these people and getting people help, whether they're children or adults, we will continue to see those generational cycles. And there's a lot of help out there, especially now that the federal government and the states and the counties and the tribes are focusing on substance use. Is it going to get rid of it? No. Is it going to be helpful? Absolutely. And I think the other thing that we're doing to help children and families is we're trying to help decrease that stigma. Because I can tell you, growing up, it was really hard to tell people, hey, I'm addicted to this, because it was so stigmatized. And I think now it's still stigmatized, but it's definitely less. And we're trying to retrain people to look at it differently, so people don't feel shameful about having an addiction or about seeking treatment or about being in recovery.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you said that, because one of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast, and Deborah and myself and Catherine, is that we all have a story, right? We all have a background. We all have something that we've gone through. And it's so important that we're able to share that story. And that's part of losing the stigmatism, right? So that's part of saying, you know what, it's okay. I've gone down this path, or I've had a family member that's gone down this path, and we can help get to the other side, because you know what? I went through it and I got to the other side, so we can help you do that. And Deborah, talk about that, because you do a great job talking about that, and it's so important.
Yes, well, for me, I had a substance abuse addiction, and I turned that around once I got to the other side. See, for me, when I went to treatment, then I left that treatment center and I went to another treatment center, and then I left there and I went to another one. It's like I was going to school. And it got to the point they're like, you can go home now. I was like, I want to make sure I get everything so I don't have to ever come back. But it taught me that there's a need for a me in this world, because those of us who've survived it can help somebody else survive it. Because you can't come to me and say you don't understand, you've never walked in my shoes. Oh, yes, I have. And maybe a little bit worse than you are. So, addiction to recovery, it's not an easy journey, but it's a journey that's so worth taking, because everybody is worth it. Everybody's life is precious. And those of us who make it, to me, have an obligation to give back, to help others make it, because, the cemetery is winning, and I don't want to see that. When we see our icons and our entertainers, and people are overdosing and dying every day, and it didn't have to be. So I want everybody to understand that it's okay to ask for help. There's never a question that's a dumb question. As long as it's a question, it has an answer out there, and we're here to help you answer it. And we're just a phone call away.
Yeah. So Catherine, and you kind of got the story from the family perspective.
So my journey is a little different. My journey includes being a parent of children in addiction, and being a grandparent, raising children from addiction. So I've had the girls now almost 3 years. I have 3 of them, 7, 6, and 4. They are now. So we've grown up a lot. We've grown together. I feel it's very important to let our families know, Matthew, I met you because I was speaking across the country on this subject and talking about my journey and telling my story. And that is because as a county commissioner, it can happen to anyone. It doesn't play a factor in poverty. It plays a factor across every human life. And so my job, I feel as an advocate in this journey, is to make sure that families see that we don't need the stigma attached to us. We need to be there, be strong. I'm walking those shoes along with many other families. My story is not unique. It just happens that I have a platform that I'm able to project and be that voice for those, that we are here, you're not alone. And we pray for our kids and our loved ones. And, we're here to save lives.
If I could piggyback off of that, Matthew, I feel it's just as important for the family to get help as the addict to get help.
Absolutely.
Because me personally, I used to look at it as nobody's hurt but me, but that's so untrue. Because everybody who loved me was affected by me. So we need to also educate the family, because the addict that's in active addiction is not the same person as the person you get back who's gone into the journey of recovery. And they have to embrace that new person and not hold them to the standards of the old person. Otherwise, we're defeating the purpose, because they're going to say, well, I'm getting treated as bad as I was when I was using, so I might as well just get high. And we don't want them to feel that way. We don't want to add to the list of excuses that we use to justify our substandard behavior and actions.
Yeah. So Stacey, my wife, the hospital that she works in, they have 24 beds in the pediatric ED. The other day, and they normally dedicate 2 of those to psych patients, considered psych patients. Psych patients could be drug abuse, sexual abuse, physical assault, all those different things. They had 14 of their 24 beds filled in this with psych patients, 14, wow. And they normally dedicate 2. So again, what kind of things do you guys do that hopefully, and I know we've touched on a little bit more, but we're coming down to the last 5 minutes. Where do you point people? What kind of resources do you guys have where we can, really rally around this, and make a difference?
So I want to encourage people, because there are tons of resources out there and there are tons of people to help. And if National DEC can help, we'll definitely let people, talk to anybody that we know, and we'll make referrals and that kind of thing. We know that at the federal level, there's all sorts of different programming and funding for folks. We know that at the state and tribal and local levels, there's also different programming. We just encourage people to Google it if you need it. There's lots of stuff out there that people can reference. But if they need help with that, in every community, there's human services or child welfare that can refer people. There's also there's recovery support programs that can help folks. There's 12-step programs that can help folks. When we go into a community, we really help the community identify what the resources are, because a lot of people don't know. And then we want to make sure that people know how to connect to the resources and know how to push people towards different things that they need. These families are not stuck because we can help them unstuck. They just have to feel like there's hope out there. And I feel like in some ways, people feel like they've lost hope because they can't find anything. We as professionals and as community members have to provide them with hope and then guide them to what they need, because there's lots of resources out there.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up, this is going fast. But as we start to wrap up, Deborah, we'll go to you, and then to Catherine, and then Stacey will come back to you and let you close us out. So go ahead, Deborah.
I would just like to really thank Stacey for making us aware and for us to be able to let the public know that the signs have always been there, and we have to overlook the excuses that we ourselves use that, well, if they need help, they'll ask for it. Sometimes we need to be that one to ask them if they're okay. Don't wait for them to ask us for help. So if we can use that I am my brother's keeper mentality, that everybody is meaningful to everybody, we can really form a community that's outside of your per se community that you live in, because we as a nation is a community, and we want to just be that help and find ways for these kids to get creative to let us know that there's danger, especially if you're locked in the house with the very people who traumatize you. We gotta find a way. So maybe we can all put our brains together and find another resource to get kids a sustainable way to say, help me.
So, child abuse is preventable. And the 1-800 number for the National Child Abuse Hotline, I'm asking that anyone out there who, is interacting with children or seeing children, whether it's the neighbor kids, whether it's you're at school, church, at the grocery store, if you see abuse or suspect abuse of a child, I'm asking you to step up and make the call. Be that voice for that child. The national hotline is 1-800-422-4453. And here locally in Ashtabula County, Ohio, that number is 440-998-1811. So once again, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and child abuse is preventable. And I'm asking everyone to stand up and be a voice for these children.
Stacey, close us out.
So I have to tell you, we can all do this different, and we have to start doing this different because children and families are important. And the children that you have and the children that you see every day will be the future of your families and the future of our country. And we have to do better by them. We are actually going to celebrate National DEC Awareness Day on April 28th. And we'd love to get everybody involved in providing information. What does substance use have to do with the family? How does it impact people? And if you need training or information or resources, you can contact National DEC or via their website at nationaldec.org, and we'd be happy to help. But we have to start doing this. Children are important.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. It's everything. So, and the care that we give them, the love that we give, everybody just wants to be loved, right? That's really why we're all here. We want to be loved. We want to be cared about. We want to be seen, heard, and validated, and every child out there should be seen, heard, and validated and loved. So this has been great. It's been great to talk to. It is an issue that we will continue to deal with. It is front and center now, but it's always been front and center forever, So thank you so much for all three of you being a part of this. And I look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.